I'm Alistair Beresford. I'm the head of the Department of Computer Science and Technology, and I'm here to welcome you all and start off the annual Wheeler Lecture. So Wheeler Lecture is our annual series of distinguished lectures named after David Wheeler, an early pioneer in computer science who made significant contributions across many areas of computer science, from programming to systems design, as well as data compression and encryption. David worked on the original EDSAC computer, the first computer which was built and operated in Cambridge in the 1940s and the 1950s. David's career was spent in Cambridge teaching and researching alongside many of us, and he was one of the first computer scientists to be elected a Fellow of the Royal Society in 1981. Now, while David is no longer with us, I'm very pleased today that Joyce Wheeler is here and able to join us today. So Joyce herself was an early user of the EDSAC computer, and I found out over lunch that she came to use it while studying for a PhD in mathematics. And indeed, Joyce and David met whilst discussing the intricate problem of how to invert a large matrix. Clearly, this discussion went very well because Joyce and David married in 1957. Let's turn to today's speaker. So today's speaker is Yvonne Rogers, and Yvonne is one of the most eminent researchers in human-computer interaction worldwide. She earned a PhD in HCI in 1988, and since then she's made foundational contributions in visual representation, in pervasive and ubiquitous computing, in social interaction around computing, and learning technologies, as well as the study of computation in the wild, among many other things. She's been the director of the UCL Interaction Centre since 2011, and before that established major HCI labs at both the Open University and the University of Sussex. Yvonne is perhaps best known to Cambridge students as an author of a textbook, Interaction Design Beyond Human-Computer Interaction. And indeed, this has been the course textbook since the first edition was published in 2002, and the current edition is still in use as a primary textbook for both our first-year Interaction Design course as well as our second-year Further HCI course. And it also exists on our recommended reading lists for the third and fourth years. So there'll be very few textbooks that have been so widely used across so many years as part of our teaching. Yvonne is also a Fellow of the Royal Society and of the British Computer Society, and is one of a handful of British researchers who've been elected Academy of Sid Kai and also received the Lifetime Research Award in 2022, as well as the Royal Society Milner Award for contributions to human-computer interaction and the design of human-centred technology. So it's my great privilege then to welcome Yvonne to come and give today's lecture.
Thank you very much, Alistair. It's a great pleasure to be here in this packed room. We had tried to make this hybrid, and I hate hybrid because we haven't been able to make it work. So sadly, all of those of you who are wanting to watch it remote live will not be able to do so, but we are recording it. So I'm sorry to those of you who aren't here. I do believe that you've come from far-flung places, and as far as Melbourne, someone has come, not especially for my lecture, but he is a visiting PhD student. So this lecture is named after David Wheeler, who unfortunately I didn't have the opportunity to meet, but I met his wife Joyce at lunch today, and I heard a bit more about him. He is a pioneer here of computer science, and he's known for lots and lots of things, including some of the first computers, but also his use of subroutines and data compression techniques. And he's remembered for his willingness to talk with anyone, and that's what Joyce said to me. He will just talk to anyone at their level, whether it's a 3-year-old or a 90-year-old, and get them engaged, and he's very friendly, and he had much humility. And so my lecture is in honour of David Wheeler. But I want to start my lecture with someone else, Doug Engelbart, who inspired me early on in my career. And he, oh dear, I don't know why you're ending that, but there we go. He set up an institution at the Stanford Research Institute, and he is known for this recording called The Mother of All Demos. And in it, he presented all sorts of new technologies, including the mouse and video conferencing, all those things that we take for granted. And I just want to play a little part of it to give you that spirit.
Come in Menlo Park. Okay, there's Don Andrews' hand in Menlo Park. And in a second we'll see the screen that he's working and the way the tracking spot moves in conjunction with movements of that mouse. So I'm putting in an entity called a statement, and that's full of other entities called words.
I'm going to stop there, even though it's a really compelling video to watch, and for you to read that it wasn't just about the mouse that he's known for, but he had a great vision, which was that to think about how we could develop computers to extend and, importantly, augment human communication and the intellect. And at the heart of his vision was this idea of the human intellect. And in the video, you can see this being typed up. But what he was wanting to very much do was to think about how we could improve individual and organizational work, in particular the effectiveness of how tasks were performed, so that better solutions could be obtained and faster solutions for more complex problems. And he talked about how we might do this, which was to think about how we could have a better use of human capabilities. And this idea about human capabilities is what stuck me, and in particular, human augmentation. And he talked about what is human capability and how we might improve it. And he talked about how we might co-evolve human and tool elements together. So he mentioned our human elements, our hunches, our cut and try, our feel for the situation. And just think about how we might co-evolve these things that we have as humans with tools, machinery, and electronic aids. And if you see this diagram on the right, you can see on the left here the human system, all the things that we have from customs, methods, language, skills, knowledge, and learning. And then on the right, remember this was back in the 60s, things like vehicles, machinery, tools, media, and facilities. And together, somehow, we can enhance or augment the capability of individuals through what look like now fruit pastels in the middle here, which was his model. I'm sure he wouldn't have called it the fruit pastel model, but it's thinking about how we combine these two together. So let's think what's happened since then. During the last 55 years, there's been all manner of hardware and software tools. And some of you might guess that I used ChatGPT to generate this. I asked it to come up with an image that showed what had been created by technology. And you can see here, it has the World Wide Web, it has quantum computing, it has cloud computing, the PC, the laptop, but it also has got loud computing. Obviously, that is to come. The driving force behind much of this technology development, I think, has been very much part of what Engelbart was talking about, which is to perform computing tasks rapidly, efficiently, and automatically, and to be able to solve them. And we have had many software products that are designed to enable people to do this, and things like Tableau, and other kinds of spreadsheets. And the idea here is that it somehow enables you to save time. And this one on the right reckons that it could save you 1 day every week, guaranteed, if you just use this app. There's lots of ways in which we have designed features at the interface to enable this speed to happen. And one of these is the use of filters, where you can go click, 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 and then it will change the parameters and show you different forecasts or different statistics on a dashboard. And then you unclick, unselect, click, 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 and you get different permutations and different forecasts. This is something that's used widely and has helped a huge deal. We also see that this push, relentless push for speed, efficiency, and automation has continued with artificial intelligence in the last 10, 15 years, where we see applications in medical diagnosis, in online fraud detection, translation, and many more have come about through these advances in machine learning with a push towards automation. And then during the last 2 years, we've seen how generative AI has followed in the footsteps. trying to come up with ways of speeding up and automating. And now we know how GPT tools can do many knowledge tasks that previously were done by humans. And I'm sure you've all had a go yourself by producing code, writing essays, blog, content and reports, and summarizing key points from meetings and multiple documents. I just tried yesterday Notebook LM. I'm sure some of you have tried that, but it's very impressive how you can just take a set of PDFs, throw it in the pot, and it will somehow summarize and compare and contrast what those main points are. ChatGPT is also able to generate new film scripts, music and videos, design websites, designs and graphics, and so on. And the outcomes from this include, as I said, saving time and increasing productivity. But it also, for many tasks, reduces the digital drudgery. Where will it end in another 55 years' time? Will we become over-reliant on AI and it will do more and more for us to the point that it will replace us? And many people are worried about how it will take over many of our jobs. But I argue that perhaps it's time to pivot from this framing of AI, ever more automation, ever more speed, ever more efficiency, and revisit some of Doug's vision, which is to think about how else might we design and develop AI tools that can augment human capabilities. And here's a picture here of Fei Li, who is at Stanford. And you can see on her slide, she says we should be not thinking about how we design AI to replace human capabilities, but to augment them. And she's part of the movement of people within AI and human-computer interaction, thinking about how we can bring these two disciplines together to develop what's now known as human-centered AI. And so recasting AI within this wider framing. And at the Stanford HAI Center, which was set up in 2019, Fei Li was one of those, along with James Landay and others. They very much have this vision of designing and creating AI applications that can augment human capabilities. I've been part of a network, which is part in Europe with 50, 60 partners, called the Humane AI Network. And part of our manifesto was very much in that spirit, which is to somehow find ways to empower human ability to make more informed choices, to build AI systems that can appropriately interact with us humans in complex social settings, and to think about the impact and the ethics of AI on society. There have been others too who've talked about human-centered AI, and Ben Schneiderman in 2022 published a book, and he's one of the biggest people, bigger than me, in HCI, and he argued that we should be developing super tools that can allow us as humans to carry out tasks way beyond what we could do by ourselves, but we should remain in control of complex systems. He's very much about humans being in control rather than handing it over to the AI. And Abigail Sellen and Eric Horvitz from Microsoft have just published an article in the Communications of the ACM where they talk about the dangers of over-reliance on automation. And they talk about, well, in human factors engineering research for the last 40, 50 years, especially in aviation and automation, they've been talking about what can be done about this. And why don't we look at what's the research that's been done there and leverage some of that? And one of the things they suggest is that let's try and think about how we keep humans in the loop, not just there to be checking, but to be developing AI that can enable us to build new skills. My own focus has been to think about how we might design technology that can augment the mind. And so instead of speeding up the tasks in the way in which I've shown you, I've been thinking about how we might slow down human thinking. And what would that do if we slowed down our thinking? Perhaps we could develop new kinds of AI thinking tools that could expand our minds, that could even open up our minds and help us become aware of what is in our minds. And where might that lead us? So I like to read around and get inspiration for thinking about designing. And several years ago, like many of us, got a copy of Daniel Kahneman's 2011 book, Thinking Fast and Slow. And as you know, sadly, he died this year, but at the grand old age of 90. But he studied a lot in behavioral economics, how people make decisions. And one of the theories that many people know, he's written a lot in the book, but I just mentioned this, is that we might have two types of thinking systems. He talks about these metaphorically, and that we can alternate between these. So system one is that this intuitive, fast, no effort and automatic thinking that has helped us in evolutionary terms with our everyday lives. And it routinely, the idea is that it guides our thoughts and actions. And it's often right, but sometimes it gets it wrong and it makes errors and it can be biased. An example of system one is if I said 2 plus 2, what comes to mind? Immediately 4. System 2, it just happens automatically. On the other hand, is the voice of reason that takes over at times when needed. And it's more effortful and it's slower, it's more deliberate and more orderly. If I said to you 234 times 45, it doesn't come straight to mind, apart from some mathematicians here. Well, I didn't know what Hasso means. I'm not sure what happened there, but it's been using, what it's saying is that Kahneman was also talking about heuristics and biases that we have in our thinking. And so having read this, I was thinking about, well, how do we try and design technologies and tools that can maybe encourage system 2 for us to be a bit slower rather than always, speeding forth. And today I'm going to talk about some of the work I've done, which is to think about how we design tools to think with. And I'm using this framework called to see. And the C stands for scaffolding, extending, and externalizing. And these are 3 approaches that I've been thinking about, how, following on from some of the ideas from Kahneman, how we might design technologies as tools. So scaffolding, by this I'm meaning guiding us to learn how to make more systematic decisions, and that we're not being rash, like system 1 thinking. Extending our thinking is how do we construct structures to broaden out our reasoning and explore new directions. And externalizing our thinking is to think about how we might provide new ways of representing problems and solving them. So I'm going to go through a case study for each of these. As I said, they're not mutually exclusive. They do overlap in terms of how they can change our thinking. So the first one is scaffolding our thinking. We've been working the last few years in investing. And during COVID, I don't know, many people had a lot of time on their hand, and they decided that perhaps they would like to make a bit of money. So the uptake of trading apps was astronomical. Over 130 million people used them in 2023. And you can see in this graph, thank you, Leon, how much since 2018 there's been a rise in people downloading these apps and using them. Only yesterday I was in London and I saw advertised on the bus and on the taxi eToro. This is one of those apps that enable you to trade. However, many people new to investing made costly mistakes and got their fingers burnt. And what we wanted to do was to think about, this is a real-world problem, there are millions of people who are trying this, how can we scaffold their thinking to help them to be more systematic? What does the novice investor do when they see this on their phone, this graph? Everything's going all right, and then there's a slight rise, and think, I'm making a bit of money, and then crash. This was happened after Liz Truss became Prime Minister, I believe. Anyway, people panic. They get very emotional. They sell too much too fast, and then they regret it later. And they don't have a good strategy to deal with this situation. So how can we help novices, new to trading, learn to think more like expert traders? That's not to say that expert traders are perfect, but they have a different way of thinking about it. In particular, they have developed the voice of reason. They have a set of questions and criteria they use before finalizing their trading decisions. Whereas beginners, novices, make these rash decisions and they are not very good at questioning their intuition, especially under stress. So we thought about how do we do this scaffolding at the interface. And at the time, we were very much looking at chatbots. They were all a rage. Chatbots, as you know, are used everywhere for Q&A. You can ask questions. They pop up, and you can ask questions about what it is in your banking or what have you. We thought we'd use chatbots in a different way. And so we developed a chatbot that would probe. It would be proactive. It would probe the novices at opportune times. And the idea was that we could somehow stop them acting impulsively and get them to think a bit about what they were doing and why, and maybe even encourage an interior monologue and help them work through their hunches that may be poorly formulated. And so here's some of the things that they might be saying, and the chatbot, have you considered this? I was so sure, overall this seems to be the best alternative, and so on. So what we did was we designed our chatbot to be called TradeBot. And we developed a platform that's similar to those that are available for trading, where on the left here you have a list of all the stocks that you can buy. Down here is a portfolio of the person that's doing the trading. And then over here is information about how well a particular stock has done. And TradeBot appears in the middle there. And it will ask questions, and it will ask the user to reevaluate their rationale for why they've invested in that stock. And so this is how it works. They're looking at the information over on the right, scanning through, finding out news, clicking on it, and then they think, I'm going to do a trade. So click on that, and they're about to buy a number of trades when TradeBot pops up and says, what is your investment hypothesis? And then they're required to type in what their hypothesis is as to why they want to buy that trade. And then they can do that. So it's getting them to think through their rationale. So just to reiterate, the idea of our chatbot was to promote short interactions that wouldn't get in the way too much, to get the user to stop, to think and reflect on what they were doing, and importantly, that this was embedded in the trading tool itself, so they can dovetail between the task, executing the task and the thinking, rather than having to come out, use ChatGPT, and then go back in. And here's some examples here where we use yes, no. We even had scales here which they could slide, and then open boxes to type in their text. So how effective was it? Well, we ran a user study with 6 participants, some of them experienced, and presented them with scenarios where they had to make certain investing decisions to buy and sell, and they were given a certain amount of hypothetical money. And the way in which we asked them to do this was to get them to think aloud, and then afterwards we had in-depth interviews. Indeed, what we found was that it did make them reevaluate their thoughts. And one of the things they said is it drew attention to things that they might have overlooked or not considered beforehand. But they also said it wasn't perfect. Sometimes it considered it was too pushy. And this made us think perhaps we'd done it too much. Perhaps it was too much in their face. And here's some quotes from some of the participants. It's a little bit intrusive, but it's something I think you could get used to if you could make it almost part of the process. And then thinking about it for long-term use. We just did it for one session. Like, I know what's going to say because I've used it for months now, and I know its nature, so it's almost like you know sometimes you don't know you want to hear it. I'm going to trade this regardless. But what they suggest is you could have different types. You could personalize or customize your trade bot to be standard, super helpful, or on the sidelines. So depending on the level of help that you might want, you could customize it. So that was our first foray into looking at how we might scaffold novices' thinking. Since then, we've been looking at how we might extend their thinking by constructing structures to broaden their reasoning. And we've done this by looking at how we move from chatbots to using large language models. So as I said, our previous study probed the investor to reflect. For the next study, we asked the investor to reason more about their intentions with the help of a large language model. And the idea here was to get them to describe the rationale behind their decisions and for the AI to augment this. Our previous one, the AI didn't augment this, it just asked questions. And we were asking, does it encourage more informed and systematic reasoning, or does it get in the way of their investing, like we found with the other one? So again, we developed a trading platform, interactive one, And this was with ETFs, which are exchange-traded funds, which are ready-made bundles of stocks and shares. And again, on the left here, we have these ETFs, a list of them. And here we have the portfolio overview. And then in the middle, again, information for each of the ETFs. And then this is the profile of the investor. And down here is where the user has access to the large language model through our investing assistant. So the way in which it works is that the user types in their reasoning before they make something. So my portfolio allocation and rationale for company Y is 10%. I'm going to put for £1,000. And it's selected for its emphasis on natural resources sectors, suggesting resilience and growth. So they type that, and then they can click on the button, get feedback, and the system comes back with a summary of what they've said, and also some suggestions, and maybe they might like to change. So here it says your initial portfolio leans heavily towards sectors with high growth potential. Whilst these choices align with long-term growth trends, the significant allocation to sectors known for their volatility, especially technology and biotechnology, may not fully align with a risk-averse profile. This person has got a profile which is risk-averse. So then they suggest perhaps you might like to enhance your portfolio going from 10% to 13%. So that's how the augmentation worked. For this research, we conducted a comparative study. So we compared a baseline where the user invests in shares without any help. We have the augmentation condition, which I've just said, where they input their rationale for investing in a particular portfolio of shares, and then the large language model augments that. But we also had what we're calling the recommendation condition, where the AI simply recommends to the user a particular portfolio. Recommendation is a very popular way of using AI, and we wanted to compare these three. So this is what happens with the Recommend AI. There's just a button where it says Get Recommendation. There's no user input required, and it will just type up output for them, what they might like to do, invest in this for stability and growth. So to compare these, we spent a lot of time thinking about the user study design. So they begin with no assistant, and then there were 21 participants, so they were randomized as to whether they got Recommend AI or Augment AI first. So with the Recommend AI, they just click to get the recommendation. The AI gives the output, and the user makes sense of their suggestion and makes trades. For the Augment, the user has to type in the rationale for their decision, and then the AI gives output with suggestions embedded into that, and then goes on to whether to accept that or not. So what did we find? We carried out a thorough study with lots of quantitative and qualitative measures. We looked at how helpful the assistants were, perceived impact on the participants' decision-making. We looked at cognitive load using NASA TLX item, and so on and so forth. I'm not going to go through all of these because that would take too long. I just wanted to pick out some highlights of what we found. Half of the participants referred the specific recommendations that the Recommend AI system made. I should point out that we really were rooting for Augment AI because that's what we believe in. So we weren't too happy when we found that they actually preferred the Recommend, but this is research. It made suggestions that they may not have thought about, and that then inspired them to think about other possibilities. And it was less cognitively demanding to use because they didn't have to type in what their rationale was. But they did say it was black box, these recommendations, that they just came from nowhere. In the Augment AI condition, it gave the participants more freedom to think for themselves, and it helped them fill in the gaps in their thinking and confirmed that they had the right thoughts. And here's a quote: "It gave me a bit of more control and agency. It kind of supports how I'm thinking. It gives me information to help me decide." So just to summarize what we think is going on, there's a trade-off here between the amount of cognitive effort that's required and the autonomy you have as a user. So when you've just got the AI recommending, making a suggestion for action, the user just has to make sense of that suggestion and make a final decision whether to act on it or not. In R1 here, we get them to do a bit of work at the beginning, which is to make explicit, make the plan for action. And the Augment AI will come back, give feedback on that plan as to whether it's a good one, and then the user has to make sense of that and make the final decision. So there's extra work. which is the cognitive effort, but they have more autonomy. So that's something that we've been exploring further, is how do we think about this trade-off? So the last way I'm going to describe now of thinking about designing tools to think with is this idea of externalizing our thinking. And this is providing new ways of representing problems and solving them. This is some work I did with NASDAQ a few years ago before we started working with AI, which was, NASDAQ, as you know, is a financial market, and they need to have, they have investigators that help with detect fraud. Fraud happens all the time. I just found this today. Billionaire Joe Lewis, who happens to be, his family trust owns Tottenham Hotspur Football Club. He was found guilty in the US for insider trading. Insider trading, for those of you who don't know, is illegal practice of trading on the stock exchange to benefit oneself, to having access to confidential information. What Joe did is he passed on information about his companies to his private pilots, to his romantic partners, there were many, and his personal assistants. And he got caught out. But a lot of them don't. But as I said, all of these financial companies, they need to find ways of detecting it, and they all employ compliance officers. And compliance officers, their role is, as I said, to try and detect market abuse. And they conduct investigations, and they have lots of sources, resources of information and databases they have to access. And they create and collate data from all these different sources, and then they have to report this back. And this requires many different steps, and the experts take many years before they can work out. And the landscape changes depending on the communication tools that people are using. WhatsApp, for example, has become very much used compared to it just being email. So the steps involved investigating a particular case. I'm not going to go through all of these, but the green ones are where you need a lot of expertise. Huge amount of work involved. And the compliance officers, there's much multitasking. They have to scan through thousands of alerts that come up through these rule-based engines that search for patterns of behaviour which may be a bit strange for market abuse. They have to sift through them and decide, and also through the emails and the WhatsApp, and check news feeds to see if there's any unusual patterns going on between two people. There's a constant demand on their attention, switching between these different resources. A lot of it is done inside the compliance officer's head. They might write notes down on a piece of paper, on a notepad, for their thoughts. And so it's quite unsystematic in some ways, but in other ways it's all done inside the compliance officer's head. So what if we were to give them a new kind of software toolkit that could augment their working, that could make it more systematic? And the team that I was working with at NASDAQ developed what was called the investigative canvas. And this was with Wendy Jefferson and Anna Leslie. And the idea here was, rather than going off into one database, coming out, going into another, was to have these all integrated, and that the disparate information could be brought together in one place, and to help them to be able to discover more connections. So in the centre of this software tool is the canvas, this pink one here, and this is where they can combine and they can collate and build up the picture through using all these different tools. I'm not going to go through them all, but there's the networker, there's the alerter from the alert engine, there's the reporter, the checker, and so on. And they designed this canvas where they could build up a picture of what was going on. So at the top here, we have the case builder, different swim lanes. You can see who's talking with whom, what trades were made, and you can start to build up this narrative through using these various tools. You can bring on different tools to be side by side. This is a people profile that shows who's been talking with whom. Is there some unusual, a lot of activity there? Why did they suddenly do a lot of email correspondence? Then there's the trading data itself that they use to see what's actually happened, what was trading with respect to the news. And then there's their, over here is a scratch pad for things that they can put on whatever it is. So the idea here was that they could bring all these together. So how effective was this tool? Our evaluation with some of the compliance officers showed it did indeed help them to externalize their internal thoughts. And some of them even described it as a whiteboard on steroids. And it could allow them to discover new connections through having this set of side-by-side tools. They can move pieces of information around to test hypotheses that came to mind. And importantly, they can pick up where they left off. But also they can share it with other team members, enabling them to understand each other's lines of thinking. So it becomes more collaborative. The people that I was working with have left now, and they've become part of a startup called letsthink.com, and I'm also part of that. And what they're trying to do is introduce behavioral science AI. And here the idea is to somehow develop these tools to reveal and to share. And so the strapline is to reveal the knowledge that helps us think brilliantly. And the domains that we're working in at the moment are in law tech, and music. But I can't really share much with you at the moment because of that particular phase. But just to say, if you're interested, there's a wonderful website with more information there. I just want to summarize, because I know it's coming up to question and tea, is that I hope I've shown you through these case studies how we can design AI and other tech tools. It doesn't have to be just AI tools, but other ones, where we can augment human capabilities. So it can be chatbots, it can be large language models, and it can be these Canvas toolkits. There can be other types of interfaces. And I've tried to show you the framing that I've used to do this through being inspired by theories in behavioral science and neuroscience and cognitive psychology, how we might scaffold, extend, and externalize how humans think, understand, and solve problems. So my title was a bit rhetorical, which was of my talk, can we supercharge the mind with AI? And I would say yes, but not turbo supercharge. If you could do that, someone would have done that already. I do think that if we change tack, we think differently about how the mind works and how we want to augment it. And one of those is to slow down our thinking. It can help us to reason and reflect better on what we're doing. And sometimes it could help us maybe to externalize our half-baked ideas, maybe even to see new connections in what's in front of us, and reduce some of the biases and hunches that we have in our decision-making, and extend human capabilities. But as we've shown in some of the studies, it does require more cognitive work, and that can be hard. At the beginning of my talk, I mentioned two computer science pioneers who happen to be male. I just want to finish by saying that there are female computer science pioneers who we should not forget, Ava Lovelace and Grace Hopper, but that will inspire me for my next talk. I want to thank all my colleagues who have worked with me from UCL, Fortis and Let's Think, but in particular Leon Reichertz, whose work I've presented today, and the others who are listed here. So on that note, I'd like to thank you all for being a great audience. Thank you very much.
Right, well, we're going to have time for questions. We've got this lovely soft microphone we're hoping that you might be able to catch hold of and speak into. We'll see how good my aim is, or indeed some of the helpers, and how good you are at catching.
Throw far then.
Not very good at catching things. Yeah. Have you come across the work of Rana El-Kayyoubi on effective computing? She's got a system that can give you data on the user's emotional state. I was just thinking of the trade brought users saying it was intrusive. If you could somehow get the emotional state data translated into a form that the model understands, perhaps could it tailor what it says or even its timing to suit the user's emotional state?
For those of you who might not have heard that, the question was, have I thought about the research that's done in effective computing, which is looking at reading and interpreting the emotional state of the user to be able to use that and model that. At least that was a semi-summary. There's been a lot of work on effective computing. One of my colleagues at UCL, Nadia Batous, has been looking into it, but I think the models of emotion are still very primitive. We tend to still use the models of the 6 emotions, but there's a lot more complexity to our human models, particularly for things like, if it's being intrusive, what emotion is that we're tapping into? I do think it's an important development to be including in this type of research, but personally I haven't been doing that work myself, but I think in the future.
I can see how we can expand the way our mind works through a sort of brainstorming process, and you can brainstorm with people who may know more or less than you about the thing you're talking about. When it comes to recommendation engines, the degree that recommendations will be helpful depends to a large degree on how much you trust the person making the recommendations, what you judge their level of expertise to be. And is there any work, or have you done any work on judging the reliability of an AI as a source of recommendations?
There's been, you probably know, a huge amount of research that's been done on explainable AI and trust to think about these very questions, and as to whether, particularly for recommendations, people trust those not knowing where they come from. So there's a whole industry out there looking at explainable AI, and I think one of your colleagues here has been working in that. It's not personally my area of research, but I think all of these things are important, whether it's the emotional aspects and whether it's trust, whether are you being manipulated at all to think in a particular way. So I think there's a whole range of things that can happen, just like with humans, when we're brainstorming, someone might want to get their opinion or their view across, and they will wait right to the very end. They've been quiet all the time, and then they come up with this idea, and that's the one that hangs at the end. So we, as human beings, are very clever sometimes at manipulating or impacting upon that conversation. I think it's going to be the same with these AI tools, but I think if we can somehow have ways to provide some sort of transparency or some way of explaining that, then the person may resort to that to see whether or not they trust it. So yes, I think there is a lot of that. And in the area of responsible AI, there's a huge amount of research going on at the moment looking at that.
Thank you very much. That was very interesting. And of course, while you were mentioning female pioneers, you could have mentioned Wendy Hall, and in fact on effective computing, of course, Ros Picard, who I remember when she proposed this field was accused of submitting women's magazine articles instead of computer science research, and the people who said that look ridiculous now. But my question is, I mean, it was fascinating we were talking about these studies, but they were staggeringly small sample sizes. And given the huge economic importance of this field, have you managed to persuade any companies or organisations to let you do studies at a sort of slightly more meaningful scale? And if not, I'd be happy to help achieve that.
That is great. That study I mentioned is hot off the press. It's still being reviewed. And I would love to be able to do much more extensive studies where we could do, have more, systematic comparison of the conditions. The answer is no, I haven't had any companies, although I am talking to some about this possibility. But I do think that it's important to do more studies with more people. I totally agree with you. And Wendy is a good friend of mine, so I would happily have mentioned her too, as is Ros as well. There are many more female professors, but I thought I just wanted to balance the first two I mentioned with those two.
Great. Oh, yeah. I'm a bit nervous about knocking out your laptop screen, so...
First of all, thank you very much for the talk. That was really interesting. I was just wondering if you had any, during either experimental development or experimental design, if you were ever concerned about reinforcing certain biases in decision-making using the LLMs, because obviously you can't really control what that AI black box is going to say. And were you ever concerned about, because obviously you want to expand someone's mind, but were you ever only expanding them in one way?
That's a very good point. I think when you start doing these experiments, you realize that your wishful thinking can only go so far. There are so many other things you need to consider. And that we just, through doing this, we realize that augmenting, people are quite lazy. They like people to do things on their behalf. If they can just press a button and it will recommend something, they'll do that. So in terms of biasing in a particular way of thinking, I'm sure that is the case, and that would be some further studies. I am putting in for a fellowship to try and look at some more of these dimensions. But I think each of these take a lot of work just to come up with an experimental design, but also for those prototypes we built. That took a lot of time to program those, to get those to work. The early research we did, we used Wizard of Oz, where we have a human pretending to be the AI, and that's another technique you can use as a quick and dirty approach to try and mimic the AI, and then you could even, slightly bias the answers to see what the response is for that. But yes, absolutely, I think, just as what was said here earlier, I think there are many ways in which the AI might do things that we hadn't intentionally thought it could do. But I think what I'm trying to do here is to open up a new area of research to think about, rather than to just kind of go down the automation, speeding up efficiency route.
Okay, I'd like to close in by thanking Yvonne very much for a fantastic lecture. So we are going to give you, however, a small gift to take away with you, which is a brief history of computing in Cambridge. Thank you again very much. And as one of the very few people, I think, who are still with us, who use the EDSAT computer, we also have a gift for Joyce to say thank you very much for joining us yet again and for another year. Thank you very much, Joyce. And finally, I've got a few other thank yous, just briefly, if I may. So thank you, first of all, to Alan Blackwell very much for helping prepare the intro today, to Joe for all the arrangements, and I'm sure you will all thank her very much now, but even more so when you enjoy the tea and cake to follow. And finally, also Ben, the research strategy team, for organising everything to do with this afternoon in terms of AV and badges and everything else. So thank you to all of those people.